Hello and welcome back to LTC Heroes. I'm your host, Peter Murphy Lewis. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We've got a great episode in store for you. Today I'm joined by Riewer. He's the president and CEO of Eventide, where he leads a staff of more than 1,400 that serve more than 1,300 seniors daily. He's been doing this since 2003. He's also served as the chair of Leading Age Minnesota and the board of directors in the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. John, welcome to LTC Heroes.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be with you today.
John, I'm excited to chat with you because we're going to talk about a lot. You and I talked, I think, a good month and a half ago, and you already gave me a bunch of advice of leaders that I should speak to in long-term care, and I've reached out to them. So I know you're a wealth of knowledge, but one of the things that came up in our first pre-chat that really stood out to me is that you were willing to share your strategic planning document with me from the beginning. We've just recently gone over that. And when I shared that in my conventions, as I've been going to the Missouri convention and Georgia convention and the HIMSS convention, they're like, wow, John is one of a kind. And I said, well, yeah. And his thoughtful insight into how to be a leader in the role of a CEO is unique. So I'm excited to go into those, John, but I want to ask you some personal questions before we get into the professional side. You okay with that?
Sure.
As a way of an icebreaker, John, do you have any uncommon hobbies that anyone outside of your close social circle or family might not know about?
You know, Peter, I've listened in preparation to no less than about a half a dozen or so of your interviews, start to finish. I knew this question was coming, and I'm sorry to tell you, I'm about as dry toast as they come. So I love doing cycling when the weather's good enough here, and we're getting close to that in Minnesota. So I'm looking forward to that. But otherwise, I'm sorry to tell you, yeah, there's not much of interest there. So
I think that cycling in Minnesota is an uncommon hobby for anyone outside of Minnesota.
it can be, especially early spring and late fall. We can have some really interesting bicycling weather in those seasons here.
In terms of what will I find either on your nightstand in terms of books, or what would I find on your radio driving to work, or on your podcast? What do you consume when it's not work related?
Well, yeah, there again, I might be a bit of a disappointment, but I will tell you, just what you're doing here with this Long-Term Care Heroes podcast, I find it so interesting. I tend to be more of a visual learner. I get my best information. The reason I have all these names to give you is I've got such a blessing to have this terrific network. And the reason I think I do is because I lean on so many people to get good advice. And now I feel like I have another resource with a podcast. If you'd have told me a few years ago that on my way to work, I might switch off the sports radio station and turn on a podcast about work, I'd have said you're crazy. But the work you're doing, the different areas you're covering, and even the different levels of leadership that you're talking to have really been, I'm sure, not just for me, but for everybody, a terrific resource. So thank you for that. That's not just a ploy to suck up to my host right out of the gate, but it really has been wonderful to see this to come to fruition.
I appreciate the compliment. And I know that it's authentic because you shared it before we hit recording. So both you and my mom are the only ones who's listened to more than one episode.
Fair enough. Well, it's growing, I'll tell you that. So,
John, tell me a little bit about how you got into long-term care. How old were you? Were your first steps in Minnesota? I like to call this the long-term care initiation.
yeah, well, speaking of moms, I credit and blame my mother for my entrance into this field, and she was a long time director of nursing at the community nursing home where I grew up, and so we started there. We were latchkey kids. Only our latchkey would be to walk from school over to the care center and wait for one of our parents to get done with work. In her case, it was at the care center, and all I remember then is just a love for the residents, especially the ones that had fairly generous candy jars. So that was really kind of cool, and really kind of opened my eyes to what an opportunity. Then you get into your teenage years, and lo and behold, I don't even remember filling out an application, but just showing up to work. And at that time, we had predominantly hard floors, right? So they were called buffers, or floor care machines, to make it short and sweet. And I remember thinking, this healthcare thing is interesting. And I think, like a lot of people, you said, boy, man, maybe to run something like this and to really make a difference would be kind of interesting. And but I thought at that time, well, this is cute, but it'd be hospital administration that might be more interesting. And so lo and behold, I went down that path and still found myself in long-term care. And gosh, I don't know what it is. It's almost 30 years later. I'm so glad I did. It's taken me into a lot of different roles and opportunities, many within this same organization at Eventide, but one that I've never regretted.
A lot of times I I go back to a quote. You've probably heard me say this before. I think that the person that I'm paraphrasing is Lawrence Taylor, and it asks about what is the part of the work that you enjoy the most. And he always says that he only got deserved to be paid Monday through Saturday, and he would work for free on Sunday. What's your Sunday football game that you do for free?
I got to tell you, especially coming out of the pandemic, you just don't realize how good you have it. And so what's happened is we've evolved. We've set up this great home office. We've got a great team here. Our closest campus is literally only 8 blocks away, and there's 2 others. So all very very close in proximity. But also, it's still difficult sometimes to find that time to just go be with residents and our teams. And so I can tell you, my best days are when I take the opportunity to go serve supper a couple of evenings at one of our assisted livings. We just finished a week or two here of staff engagement meetings, finally able to go back into the campuses and talk about the whys of some of the things we do, talk about the different improvements we're trying to make coming off of our staff surveys and some follow-up on those things. And I just know that my best days, and it's that feeling of work well done, is when you've had a chance to connect with the people. And I think honestly it goes back to why I enjoyed it when I was a kid, and nothing's changed. I can tell you, my kids grew up, anytime they'd show up at the kindergarten class and they said, well, tell us about your parents' job. And I can tell you, until they got a little older, they thought that my job was cutting cake and pouring coffee, because the times that they show up at the communities are the times there's an event going on. And so I think until they were in their teens, they literally thought that's how I spent my days. And I don't know that my wife has done anything to kind of dispel those myths, but long and short of it, it is when we get to spend time with our residents and our staff members.
I'm glad you mentioned kind of those engagement and team meetings, because I participate in a number of those with different organizations, and I like to look a little bit of how leaders lead and determine what they prepare for, because a lot of times when a president or CEO stands up, it seems like the words flow so easily, and they also know how to transition, and they pass certain points off in the meeting to someone else. What are the things that come really easy to you in those types of team meetings? And then what is it that you turn to your right-hand man or your right-hand woman, because they really complement where you need some support?
Great question. I think we've all embraced our different roles very well here within our organization. So well so that when it gets too far into the operations, I very much lean on our chief operating officer, on our executive directors who are there every day on site and leading. And one of the things we try to do, there are some things that we need to do for efficiency, for quality, and all those things, but we really have, each of our locations has its own identity. So I'm always pretty careful not to go down a road that I have limited information on relative to just the identity of the campus, or even some of the weeds of the policies and procedural things. I've been around long enough that I can probably fake it to make it. And when you talk about the CEO at ease, I never not go into one of those meetings just with a little bit of anxiety about, well, I wonder what's laying in the weeds that I'm just not sure about. But I guess even when those kind of those questions or those opportunities to clarify come up, I know that all the things we're doing are for all the right reasons. And so we talk, even in levels of our strategic plan, about what it is we're doing, yes, but more importantly, why. And so I think it's just as important for a housekeeper in our most rural location to know why we might want to expand services at another campus, because I think too often we as leaders think that decision or that buy-in stops at our board table. And I'll tell you, that just isn't the case. We've got to make sure that all of our colleagues know what we're up to and why. And the other thing we're really finding out, whether it's staff recruiting and that kind of thing, they're our best salespeople. And it doesn't matter. They don't have to be in sales to be that. They can be our housekeepers, our CNAs, our nursing team, our culinary specialists. They are our sales force. And whether it's, bringing in additional friends as coworkers, or what they're telling families out in the community about the services that we have and how we go about our business, those are very important things. So I always think, what would they need to know that they shouldn't read about in the newspaper that somebody might ask them about in the grocery store? And so that's kind of where we start our conversations. And of course, all of these things also include our follow-up to our employee satisfaction surveys, because I still see there have been times I've seen people do these surveys and are not accountable to, okay, what did we do about the scores? First of all, where do we land? What's going good? What needs improvement? And then what did we do over the course of the last 6 months to try to remedy these opportunities, or try to create some opportunities here? So
I'm interested in if you can remember what your first meetings were like, either your first strategic meeting or your first team meeting, and what stands out for you, either emotionally or insights or feedback that you got from them. Can you take me back to the first time you were in a leadership role?
yeah, I remember it well. I was a very rural North Dakota. In fact, it was one of the few for-profit facilities in North Dakota. And so I was maybe within a year out of college. And right about this time of year, I remember I got the job. And I was sitting in the so-called big chair the Monday after Easter. And I thought, can you believe somebody would trust all of these people with me? What you soon find out is that isn't at all what they did. They knew very well they had a longtime director of nursing who was going to make sure I didn't do anything stupid, and a great team behind her on top of that, and also the support of a corporate team, not so far down the road to make sure that I had support as I got into this thing. So I remember that, and I remember then that meeting, the first meeting with the staff, and thinking, my goodness, talk about imposter syndrome. 23 years old, they're going to know I have, and absolutely they knew I had no answers. And I'm not sure almost 30 years later, much has changed. Coming out of all the different, I tell our college students up the road in healthcare administration, I said, the best part about you coming into this work right now is experience means very little, because things are changing at such a rapid pace that if you're looking for the answers, over the past few years, they're not there. The answers have to be found. And I said, so coming in with a fresh perspective is probably the number one thing you have going for you. And so I'm probably a long-winded answer to your question, but I remember this thinking, gosh, I am not going to have any of the answers these people are looking for. And so oddly enough, here almost 30 years later, I still feel that way many times in those meetings. So,
Jon, I speak to a lot of leaders, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. And one of the things that stands out in both of our chats before we hit recording and when we spoke over a month ago is how much you pay attention to different types of leaders that I've interviewed, or friends of yours in the industry that you think I should interview. How would you describe your leadership style? And just so you know where I'm going with the question, I'm trying to understand the way that you perceive other leaders. I feel like you're absorbing it like a sponge. So let's start off with how you would describe your leadership style.
Well, I guess there's an extrovert nature. I'll start there, because it took me forever, not only professionally, but even personally. I've got a college-age son now, and it took me years to understand that introverts are, there's different. They can still be extroverted at times. They can still have lots of thoughts about what's going on. They're just not as willing to express it as I am all the time. So understanding that isn't leadership in itself, whether you're extrovert or introverted, and that actually I've come full circle. I've started to believe that introverts probably make the best leaders, because they take the time to listen, they take the time to evaluate, versus probably more of my style, which is sometimes the filter's limited. You're getting a very raw response, sometimes less thought out than I would prefer some days. But nonetheless, I think, the style has pros and cons. So when I think about the various people I've learned under, the various people that even today I get the chance to work in the field with, there's some names that stick out. And I'll go back to when I started even in this organization where we were a single site facility. We had a great mission and everything was going well. But I knew that the opportunity for the mission was to grow and do more good. And and still to this day, one of the busiest leaders I know is a guy named Dan Lind with Presbyterian Homes out of the Twin Cities. And I don't know why, but I've learned that I'm not special. He does this for just about everybody. Whether the guy starts his day at 5 a.m, and I don't know if he ends it before 10 at night, and came up to Moorhead and helped our board understand at that time that being faith-based is also means to have some faith in what we're doing in terms of growth and the risk that's involved with that. And even to this day, he's somebody I look to. He's a very anybody who knows him knows he's a genius in our field, but also a very humble leader. So it's a rare trait to find the very best and have them be so humble and so giving of their time that you wonder what you've done to deserve it. And I think I'm starting to figure out, and I think it's to try to pay it forward in some way. So whatever that means, I know that when I get a student from down the road call and wonder about career paths, I never turn those opportunities down and try to make sure, even in the busiest of times, that we make time for the people who are coming next.
Then this is kind of in segue to speaking about your board and also your strategic planning, but in the lines of leadership. In traditional business development books or leadership books, they talk about strengths and weaknesses, and the general sense is that you should continue to focus on your strengths and complement yourself with weaknesses. What's a weakness that you have that you see in another mentor of yours or someone that's come before you, and you're like, man, that is really amazing. I know that I don't have it, and I'm just going to fill myself around with other leaders who have it.
It starts with, and it's been an issue of mine since far back as I can remember, and that's patience. And sometimes, the answer isn't always right there. It just takes time to develop, and having a sense of silence in the conversation or the room. I deliberately find myself now trying to count to 10 to make sure I'm not cutting off conversation and allowing that awkward silence to happen. I know it sounds just absolutely ridiculous, but I'm that kind of person that just thinks any kind of silence is just awkward. And what happens is we end up cutting off people who are more thoughtful about what they want to throw out there and trying to articulate just the right answer. And so I'm trying to understand that. And I think to that end, Peter, one of the best opportunities I've had, and I actually went to our board because I'd had such good feedback from other colleagues about it. And I did it about 3 or 4 years ago. So you'd say, geez, 25 plus years in the business, you must struggle to think what else is there to learn. And the fact is, I just felt like so many things were changing. And even our workforce, the younger leaders that are coming through, I was starting to feel disconnected with, am I offering from leadership what they need and what they see as priorities going forward? So I actually took it upon myself to bring in a coach. And man, it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. And just an opportunity to talk through things that we're discussing today, leadership style. What are the things that I need to do to improve our direct reporting relationships? And it works so well that I had even some of my folks ask if they could also have coaching. So I assume that they saw improvement and they thought, man, if it can work for Riewer, maybe we should all be looking at this. So it really was a great opportunity. I continue to thank my board for making that investment and helping me kind of jumpstart. I don't know if I call it a career midlife, but really kind of help me jumpstart what the next chat. Because I think the other thing I've kind of reflected on here is, gosh, I don't know when it happened, but I was always the kind of the young pup in the room, right? The spring chicken, the 23-year-old who is, trying to lead folks that are much more senior than he is. And boy, it snuck up on me. I'm the gray hair. I'm the more senior person at the table now. And so, some of those things in your leadership style have to change along with that as well.
I want to move on to strategic planning. And, as I shared in the intro, you shared your strategic planning with me before we started this call and when we first chatted about it. And what was interesting, I think, is that every leader approaches strategic planning with a different way, either a different methodology or it lines up with their personality. How long have you been participating in the creation of strategic plans, and how has your methodology changed over time?
Yeah, I had a stint right before I started at Eventide with a hospital system just for a couple of years. But one of the things that I took away from that is really there is quite an art to good strategic planning, and learned a lot. I don't want to tell you that I spend a lot of time creating I mean, I've seen some beautiful strategic planning documents. I mean, just well done. That probably isn't my style. I'm more interested in what can we execute around, and I think, how do we fail fast so we know that the plan is just that, it's a roadmap, and so if we get far enough into it, we're going to have to take some detours along the way, and those are the things that I find most interesting, and so when you saw it, I probably cautioned you, said, keep in mind, this is there's nothing magical about the document. It's us just agreeing to say, here's how we'd like to spend the next 3 to 5 years of our resources, our time, and our talent, and promote and move the organization's mission forward. So I think I try to keep it real simple, probably for my own benefit as much as anybody's, and then spend most of my time making sure that our board, right, again, down to any of our staff members, really understand the general whys of this. And I think that keeping that less complicated, and then also sprinkling in those outside voices. I think too often our lens gets a little bit blurred about what's important, or we start looking for the answers in the same old places. And so we try to bring in some provocative outside sources, and that means even bringing in folks that might even compete with us in some different lines of business from time to time, or might make us uncomfortable with some of the answers because there's some things that maybe I don't know as much about that could end up being the outcomes of this. So that's just been really good. And I think the other thing I'd add to that is the importance of governance. I think in this 18 or 19 years that I've been with the organization, unknowingly, well, not unknowingly, but I probably didn't give it the full value that as we were growing, I've had some good board chairs along the way that have kind of said, hey, by the way, we should be thinking about our board structure. And so we took these little bites out of the apple, where it was, we were the traditional Lutheran organization where all of our board members came from our sponsoring churches. And you can't argue with 60 years of success. They've done a fantastic job. But as things were evolving and the scale was growing and the complexities of the industry continue to grow, we had to have people who are pretty committed to the process. And, sometimes it would be at the Lutheran church, well, if so-and-so is on finance committee, I guess I could be on the Eventide board. That's really kind of where we had to evolve from. And then really kind of looking at all those metrics that you look at. What is the backgrounds of the board members that we have? Because we want different voices at the table. And we always joke we had an abundance of retired white male farmers, and that's not in itself a bad thing. But we knew that we needed to kind of evolve beyond that. Now I worry we don't have enough retired farmers on the board. But long and short of it, those are the things that, as we look back now, 10, 15 years ago, man, what an investment that has been for us to continue to evolve our board and our governance model along the way.
What has your growth trajectory looked like for you over those 18 or 19 years? Tell me what your first year looked like when you were speaking to the board, and what your strategic plan might have looked like back in 2004, 2005. And tell me where you are now. What are you guys looking at ahead of time?
Well, I can tell you the first 3 years, a friend of mine, a CFO that retired a few years back, remembers the day I walked into the office after a couple of years of doing some planning and kind of starting to set the table. And I think the comment was, when are we going to do something? And there wasn't a lot of discussion about the what, just we got to do something. And that kind of set the table. The other thing that happened, and I say it with reverence to the pandemic and all that we've been through, the community had a flood scare. And so there was a lot of things. We had a lot of relocation of residents for a period of time. It really forced us out of our comfort level. And I always say, never waste a good crisis. And I think in some way, that was a little bit of a watershed moment, that when you're out of your comfort level, you start to see things a little bit differently. And I think that was kind of when the trajectory started. We worked on a second campus. We crossed the infamous state border of Minnesota into North Dakota. We went to places people didn't think we belonged because we were supposed to be on this side of the river doing our thing in this cute little box. And when that happened and we made that first step, then it just kind of ballooned out from there. Within reason, what our balance sheet could handle. I think one of the things that I haven't always given as much appreciation for is just the development of what we have here with the operating company or the home office. We tend to think about the world in terms of all the campuses, but the fact is the things that we're doing here with our 24 people in the home office was really one of the biggest steps we took right in there with the governance model changes and those things. Because it's one thing to say you're going to do it. So you go back to the strategic plan. I'm happy to share it. I got that from Dan Lynn, who is happy to share his, because at the end of the day, it's about execution. So anybody can look at our plan, but the ability to go and execute is a much different task.
I think that there were 5 or 6 items on your strategic plan, and I would say most of them had to do with consolidation, acquisitions, certain troubled facilities that you ended up taking over. Has it always looked more at the high level, or have there been some items over the last 18 years that you're like, oh no, this was about retention, or this was about culture, or this was about empowering a new generation that are gonna a succession? What did it look like 3 or 5 years ago in terms of being different from today?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think I'm answering it the right way in saying maybe even as soon as 5 years ago, I was still buying into, the only good strategy was a strategy of growth. And the fact is, I think, we've reset some of the targets that I don't know that bigger is what we're as interested in right now is better. So I don't know if that's a maturity that I'm feeling as a leader, if it's that reset around the coaching or whatever it is. I'm far more comfortable in my skin telling you today that we may not grow bigger, but we are going to grow better. And some of those things mean doing away with some of the old product or programs that people are finding less and less interest in, or redoing or rethinking how we use something like a skilled nursing bed going forward. There's nothing rocket science about it, but again, the execution, how do we get to that point where we're coming up with different models that make us less reliant on those care center beds that are just sitting there? That's a heavy lift. And so we're doing things like moving out of antiquated facilities and where we have to reinvesting and finding that efficiency and that scale. We've got a couple projects tapped right now that are all about the workforce issue. I mean, we used to do market studies to find out where the customers were. I really think we're getting closer to doing market studies to find out where the employees are. And so that's really some of the mind shift that I know I'm going through, that our team is going through, is that how do we work a little smarter? How do we make sure that, if we're going to have, 1,100, 1,200 units of whatever, and that there's already the flaw in my thinking, units of housing. What does that mean to people? I mean, is that a semi-private skilled nurse? I mean, something that I don't want to exist anymore going forward? Or is it is it an apartment? Or more importantly, is it a home and community-based service programming opportunity? So I mentioned to you earlier, we're looking at things that don't have anything to do with bricks and mortar. We're trying to find our way in that world of pace and some of those other things that aren't judged the way we've typically been judged in our growth, which is how many buildings do you have, how many apartments or units do you have? It's a whole different way of thinking, and I'm really excited about it. I think let's all agree that maybe I'm in the middle to just passing over the middle of my career path. It's going to look way different than the first half, if that makes any sense.
It does. I'm interested in your creative process of how you start to of how you come up with your strategic plan. I'm guessing I'm going to guess, and then I'm going to let you correct me. I'm guessing some of it is you borrow. It sounds like you are very, very you have a close-knit community of other leaders and you guys share. So you're like, oh, that's interesting. Well, I need to think that way. Like, how does that affect mine? I'm guessing some come from books, and I'm guessing you also have some that come from internally, things that you see. I know that when I am planning ahead, it usually happens when I cannot have internet. So my best strategic planning happens when I'm on an airplane without good Wi-Fi and I'm using pen and paper. Tell me what, and it also happens usually when I haven't slept well. So like if I have a 6 a.m. flight, that 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. when my coffee's still running and I'm not sleepy, I'm doing well. What does yours look like?
Thank you. Something resonated with me when you were in the process of asking the question. It's two things, and I'm coming off one of them, which is I have the good fortune of being part of a professional network of other CEOs around the nation that meet once or twice a year and talk about things in confidence that only we can talk about. And it's an opportunity to hear best practice. It's an opportunity to share war stories about the daily grind and those types of things. But I always come out of there. In fact, my team worries about me. I come back from that meeting and I've got about 100 things in my journal that we need to get going yesterday. So that's one way, and I encourage anybody, regardless of where you're at in your career path, to find that group of people and do that. The other one is in Minnesota. It's not listed as a state holiday, but the deer hunting season is very important. And I can tell you there's many years the deer are just as perfectly safe as they can be around my deer stand. But what I do enjoy about that, it's an early morning, it's a thermos of coffee, and it's just there. You're there in your tree stand thinking about any number of things. And believe it or not, it's just like you. That's the quiet time I get to reflect on a number of things. And I almost look at whether it's just a time, sections of time in my life, thinking about, what was I doing this deer season? What were the things that I was worried about a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? What will I be worried about? God forbid, if I'm lucky enough to make it 5 deer seasons away from now or 10 out. So I kind of use it as my reset personally. And I love the analogy you gave about just, when I'm disconnected from all the things, I don't get cell service out there. What a helpless feeling that is, and what a great feeling that is all at the same time. So to answer your question, yeah, those two opportunities provide a lot of, and then I think you started off with, where do I get some of my creative thoughts? There's no magic there. I have borrowed every good idea I've ever had, and maybe I'll tweak it a little bit, add my own little kind of creative flavor to it. But the fact of the matter is, there's nothing we're doing in our strategic plan that somebody else isn't doing somewhere else. And in fact, we're going to make our way over to your part of the world in a week to really explore some of the fantastic base sites that exist, because we know what's being done and being done well, and how do we jump on that learning curve and leverage that opportunity.
In terms of crazy ideas, and I don't know the word that you used, it maybe far off ideas, far-fetched ideas. When you and I chatted in January or February, you said a percentage of your strategic goals you don't necessarily share with everybody, or you might just share them with the board so they know that this is a high lofty goal, it's a stretch goal, but you don't want to scare your team. Are there any big goals that you had 5 or 10 years ago that have come and gone, you didn't actually execute upon them, that you feel comfortable sharing, and you can explain, like, I had this out there because at the time it looked good, but as things became a little bit more clear, I said, this is a good thing I didn't share this with the team?
Yeah, I think it has all to do with that issue of scale. How big do we need to be? How big do we want to be? And sprinkled into that, of course, is always a bit of a leader's ego around that. And I think, one of the things, I have a board member. I have to laugh when I think about her, because she has kept a very detailed list of all the things that I've brought to the table, both formally and informly.
That's terrifying.
It is terrifying, but we have fun with it, and it's done in a way that's we have a lot of fun with it. The blessings of the things that never worked out, right? So there's a ton of those, and I kind of refer to that as our spaghetti on the wall. And we're going to throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall. We're going to see what sticks, and then that's what we go after. So to your point, yeah, there's I would say even within that smaller executive committee of the board, probably have heard some things where they've taken me aside and said, yeah, probably hold off on that till we have a few more details. And that's not uncommon. And it's a group that I trust to be able to do that with. So what a blessing that is, to work for a group of people that you can have some harebrained ideas and throw it at them once in a while.
If you were to create a new board tomorrow, let's say that you get called into a position, Wichita, Kansas, you don't really know anybody, you don't have any real ties yet. It doesn't matter if you ruffle feathers because you were brought in to, take an organization to its next level. What does the composition of that board look like for you in terms of diverse knowledge, diverse industry, age, amount of time on the board, connections to long-term care? Let's call them Lutheran, just to continue in your same segment. Can you give me an idea of what that looks like?
Yes, all of the above. We started with all members from our Lutheran congregations, and there was nothing wrong with that. But what an opportunity when you start sprinkling in gender equality, when you start sprinkling in differences of background, whether it be, in our case, a college president, to the business person down the street. And I think the secret sauce, if there's any, to our best board members they're usually integrated into the community. They're usually not on many boards, not just ours. And they're usually thinking about things in the context of the community. And so I would find less interest that they have this great long-term care or healthcare background. It doesn't hurt anything. We've got a little bit of that as well. But I think that the best board members are usually those that are connected in the community in ways of helping us see how we fit in. And one of our values is around being a great community partner as well. So I'll tell you, even the place we're sitting, you've probably heard some traffic noise because we're in downtown Moorhead. Across from me is the iconic Dairy Queen building. And about 5 years ago, when we were looking for a place to move our home office, we could be anywhere. And this part of our community needed an injection of love, if you will. So we made this investment, and now I can show you where it's popping up, and because of thinking about things in a bigger context, that's happening. I'll give you another example. We've got a board member who's very involved with the school district and learned in working with the football coach that a lot of our athletes were not getting the calorie intakes they needed, and came back to us and said, I wonder how our residents might play a part in that. And for a few $1,000s worth of peanut butter and bread, we've got what we call the peanut butter brigade of residents that make these sandwiches, have those athletes come in and tell their story within the community. Those are things that I'd like to tell you, man, that's my idea, and I think of it. But no, it's really around how do we find that integration of those thought leaders in the community, and then how do we make sure they know how to tell our story as well. That what some of the things we're doing in their other groups are important. So we've been very involved in, like most, trying to find, and again, in the middle of Cornfield, USA, trying to find those right answers around diversity, equity, inclusion. And I can tell you, the harder you look, the more opportunities you're going to find. And so we're very fortunate to have started to make some headway in that. It's nowhere where we want to be. It's nowhere where we want to be yet in terms of our leadership within our campuses. And there's plenty of excuses and crutches, and I'm guilty of that some days myself. But the harder we look and the more of a priority we make we're starting to see some things come together around that end too. So we just have this, again, it's been naturally evolving. We work with a governance committee, right? So these aren't people I'm handpicking. These are a subsection of the board that are saying, what's the right, mix, but also what are we missing in terms of background, and how do we make sure that the people we're bringing on don't have to agree, but how do we have a good culture within the boardroom as well? So it sounds kind of wishy-washy, Peter, and I apologize for that, but I really have come to appreciate over the last 18, 19 years of my time here where we've evolved as a boardroom for the organization.
Can you think of an instance, and you don't have to share the details, can you think of an instance where you needed to call a board member outside of a normal meeting for advice on PR or HR or banking or finance? Or can you think of an example and tell me, how it was so incredibly helpful to have that person that, a phone call away, and they can help you move quickly?
Yeah, so we have, interestingly enough, I don't know if this is exactly the answer you're looking for, but our board president, they have a 3-year limit. Our board terms are three-year terms, and then if they're in the the leader, the vice chair, chair cycle, they're limited to 3 years as chair. And I can tell you, without fail, that chairperson becomes really my closest confidant for those 3 years. And then thankfully they stay on as a past chair, so they're helping even that new relationship happen with the incoming board chair. So the long and short of it is, there are times, where I want to make sure, am I getting the right information out to the board? Are we too late on some things, too unfiltered on some others? So I really lean on that board chair. In terms of calling them outside of work, where I think it really got traction for me is when we start to have those personal relationships with board members that you feel comfortable having those conversations about, maybe it's higher ed, or it's how our relationships are with some other folks in the community. And again, even I pick on our board member that has all the things that we've tried, there's value in that. And I love that somebody's paying attention to that. And so, there's been plenty of those times, and there'll be plenty more ahead, I'm sure.
How is the composition of your care changing over time? You've been with the organization for a long time, and there's a lot of talk of things moving to home health. There's a lot of new programs. You yourself has introduced me to individuals that are involved with the PACE program. Where is Eventide headed, and what changes have you already made to go that way?
Well, it's interesting. On the community services line, or community-based services, a number of years ago, we had tried before my time to go into home health, and we just couldn't find the scale, couldn't get the right pieces and parts together. We have a competitor in town as well that tried, and it just didn't take hold. And we were able to really talk this through and create a joint venture. So if you can imagine, I think the word I've used is co-opetition. So there's, we compete with this organization, but we collaborate on some other things. So we are having great success in a home care and hospice company, of which we're 1/3 partner, along with our competitor here in town and another agency in a community up the road. And we've been able to scale that out. We're not only in Fargo-Moorhead, we've entered into a couple of other communities and see opportunities beyond that. And so that was really kind of our way of addressing that. Now, it's easy to come back after that, and I've even had staff say, "Gosh, seeing as successful as it is, don't you think we should have just done that on our own?" And the answer is absolutely not. We would have never reached the full potential and been able to be where we are now without those partners at the table. So that collaboration has been so much fun, and actually something we're looking to build upon as we go forward. And I could see where that is an opportunity to address a number of opportunities that we couldn't do alone, but need that scale and frankly raise all boats at the same time.
How did that conversation come about with your competition?
I think so I should go back a step. The CEO of that company and the other partner, we had known each other prior to our current roles, and had shared probably enough beers over the years that it wasn't like we were starting from scratch. So we could have pretty honest conversations about what are the pitfalls, what if it doesn't work, or more importantly, what if it does work, and what if it works with the kind of sustainability we have now, where the three of us aren't at the table? What are the things that we need to do to make sure that this continues to do the mission that we set out to do even after we're gone? So it's interesting, and what we're starting to learn, kind of through the pandemic and after, is the people we thought were our competitors really aren't our competitors. I think that you're going to see a lot more of these kind of collaborations, potentially even, it's already happening, consolidations, because we're finding out we need each other more than we thought in terms of making sense of all this going forward.
Jon, as we start to wrap up, I like to ask executives about what they are excited about. Coming out of the pandemic, we're still in the middle of a severe staffing crisis, and I don't think anyone has a true thermometer on when it's going to definitely improve. Reimbursement rates are in trouble. What are you optimistic about? What are you excited about in the next 18 months, whether it be long-term care or what you're doing in your organization or your role on the team?
Boy, that's a heavy one. I should have been more prepared for that, but I think I'd probably outline a couple things. I look around coming off of our staff engagement meetings now with the people that I have. I would go to war with. They are, the word resiliency gets overused lately, but we've got people that have demonstrated beyond any thought I could have ever had about why they do what they do, and why and for whom they do what they do. And I'm going to try to figure out a way that we can further invest in those people, because I think there's going to be a part of it where there's going to be some transient kind of uh, uh, things going on in our workforce, but there are some people that are literally carrying the water for us every single day, and we've got to figure out a way that we represent the benefits of that career to them as we go forward. The other thing is, I look at, am I excited about it? Depends which day, but anything that we thought was still 5+ years out to have to worry about, it's on our doorstep right now. And maybe it's even further out than that. So I think there's days where I'm frustrated when it still feels, at least from the regulatory front, that we're still playing the same old game, but trying to do it in a different way. And so I can't do anything about that. So we can only control, how we go about our business going forward. And the whole idea, I think that there was a feeling for many, many years before the pandemic that what we had wasn't sustainable, and it's probably not even what people want. So this was to me, the pivotal moment that kind of, we have to start over and think differently. And I think that's probably what I'm fired up on. It feels like I'm, as I mentioned earlier, starting a brand new career, and that scares the heck out of me, but it also excites me.
Jon, I know that there's a chance that we will meet up in Wichita next week, and I'm excited to continue to connect with you. I know some of the listeners are going to want to reach out to you. Where can we find you online and best connect with you?
Sure. I should have my address at the ready, but I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm Eventide Jon on the Twitter. I don't do much. You'll see on Twitter, you'll see a lot of my repostings of my favorite Minnesota sports things that are happening. So probably LinkedIn would be the best if people want to connect.
I appreciate it, Jon. Jon, thank you for joining LTC Heroes, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Thanks, Peter. Great work that you're doing. We appreciate you.